Hello, as you said, my name is John Carey. I'm a software developer for a financial company on the west side of Madison.
Do an opening prayer.
Oh, cool. All right. Thank you, Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Lord, thank you for bringing us together this evening. Thank you for the gift of rain. Please help us be attentive to the speakers. Please help us have a lot of courage in examining ourselves and our life of prayer, and give us good resolutions that we can make to improve our daily life and improve our resolutions that we can draw closer to you. Our Father, who art in heaven,
hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.
In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Okay, so to recap, my name is John Carey, and I wish that I was a saint. And there's a lot of other things I wish as well. I wish that the Estes Park, Glen Haven area in Colorado wasn't horribly flooded. I wish for world peace. I wish that I had a pony that could fly. That would be pretty amazing. All right, let's try the opening again. Hello, my name is John Carey, and I want to be a saint. And there's a lot of things that I want. I want board games. I want some of that great Spotted Cow beer. And I want to climb as many of the Colorado 14ers as I can. And you'll notice a pattern between the way I use those two words, wish and want. They both refer to desires that I have, but those two desires are different. With want, we refer to things that are in our control. So, consume them. So when I use the word want, I'm referring to things that are within my control, things that I can accomplish. So if I wanted a beer, I can ask Vince to get one and then open it for me.
Do you want to know?
Yes, I do want to know. If I want a board game, I can head down to my friendly local game shop and pick one up. And if I want to climb Colorado 14ers, I can just make an effort every time I go out there to try to pick one up. Wishes often refer to things that are not in our control. I wish that the Estes Park area wasn't flooded, but it is. There's nothing I can do about it. I wish for world peace, but there's not a whole lot that I can do to affect the situation. And I wish that I had a flying pony, but they do not exist. So how do we view sainthood? Right? Because I think if I was to ask everybody, you would all say that you want to be saints. But sometimes we fall into the trap where we will say, I want to be a saint, but the actions that we take are more reflective of wishing to be a saint. Because sainthood isn't just going to happen. I think it would be awesome if we just woke up one day and we were in communion with God and we had, a smaller inclination to sin. But without a proper plan of life and without good work, it's still just a wish. It's a desire that's going to be unrealized. So I think it's worth it to examine yourself and determine the type of desire that you have to be a saint on the sliding scale of wish to want. Because as I said, it's very easy to say that you want to be a saint, but it's quite hard to make that statement true. If we all wanted to be saints in the same way that we want food or water or shelter, with God's help, I think we would see results really, really fast. Now, I think most people are aware of the different things that they can and should be doing to get a solid plan of life in action and work on cultivating the virtue. We hear it at Mass all the time. Get in your mental prayer, do a rosary, things like this. If you don't have ideas, you can talk to any of the priests here, your spiritual director if you have one. I'm sure there are tons of resources online, etc. So I'm not going to spend the time talking about those things that you can do for that reason. And the other reason is because I think everybody here is probably at different levels of where they are in their spirituality. The advice that I might give to somebody just starting off on their journey is quite different than the advice that I would give to somebody who has been already working on their prayer life. So instead, I have 4 points on just general methodology. Because we need to work on this, and we need to be smart about working on it. I will write them down So, the first point is success spirals. The second point is concrete starts. The third point is self as enemy. And the fourth point is the Band-Aid view, or hyperbolic discounting. Okay, so we'll get into all of those in just a second. So, first, success spirals and realistic goals. Okay, so a common piece of advice that you are given when you're faced with a really monstrous task is to break it down into a series of smaller tasks. So for example, if you're writing your thesis or working on a big work project, you're not going to sit down and say, I'm going to write all of my thesis today. That's suicide. But it's odd that occasionally we will think of sainthood in this way. You know, we're going to say, all right, I'm going to fix my life totally starting tomorrow. And that's a great desire, and that's a great inclination. But it is one of those things where it's going to be very hard to actually achieve that goal if your desire is total sainthood starting tomorrow. So instead of just saying, tomorrow I'm going to be a saint, it helps to break up the problem. You know, let's just work on doing 15 minutes of mental prayer tomorrow. And part of the reason this works is because of success spirals. The more tasks that you can successfully accomplish, the more likely you are to attempt and then accomplish larger tasks. Conversely, if you attack a large problem right away without forethought or planning, it is more likely that in the future you'll burn out and you will be less likely to attempt things. And I saw this problem in my own life when I would go on retreats. Because after a retreat, you feel really fired up and just ready for anything. You think, I'm going to fix all of my problems. I'm going to start doing daily mass. I'm going to start praying the rosary. I'm going to do 30 minutes of mental prayer a day. I'm going to join a choir. I'm going to walk everywhere barefoot. Things like this. And this is really, really hard. And as somebody who had never really had a great plan of life up until that point, and you're trying to do all of these things at once, it's suicide, as I said before. And you can perhaps keep this going for a week or two. You know, there's a lot of graces that God gives you after retreat. But by and large, this approach is unsustainable. Okay. So if you're having trouble getting traction on the resolutions that you make, you might want to take a look and see, have you picked realistic goals for yourself? And it might be a good strategy to, when you're initially starting out, undershoot what you think is a realistic goal. Because especially if you haven't sort of really tried this before, you might be a little overambitious. And if you do undershoot below what you are actually capable of, once you build up that willpower in those successes, you have confidence and you're able to attempt bigger and larger resolutions. Now there are a couple of pitfalls in this strategy. First off, don't use the undershooting idea to set a really, really low standard for yourself. You know, you don't want to be ambitious, but you also don't want to be stupid. Second, know that this can work the other way too, with failures, where if you are failing at something, this can sort of turn into a depression spiral, where if you fail a couple times in a row, it makes it harder and harder to succeed in the future. And you're more likely to keep failing if you don't get out of it somehow, which can be going to confession, you know, if this is sort of a big moral failing that you're having problems with, or just sort of taking a step back from the situation and reevaluating. An example of these success spirals that has worked in my life was last Lent. So once again, I was sort of hoping to get myself into gear and get a lot of things back on track this Lent. But I realized that I couldn't come up with a list of large resolutions and kick it off from day one. So what I did was I made a list of, 5 or 6 things that I wanted to be doing during Lent. And I decided that I was only going to focus on one of them a week and sort of build it up cumulatively. So the first week, I decided, all right, all I'm going to worry about is getting the daily rosary. The second week, I decided, assuming that I had been successful that week, I would add on the heroic minute. And the third week, I would add to those two, a third thing. And this I had a lot of success with during Lent. It was a very good Lent for me. And I decided to structure it this way because I knew that if I attempted all of those things at once, I would more than likely crash and burn. All right. So that, yes?
Can you tell us what the heroic minute is for those who don't know?
I can. So the heroic minute is the idea that once you get up in the morning, you get up. So you're sleeping comfortably, it's raining outside, and it was this morning, which was nice. The alarm goes off, and then that second, you get out of bed, turn off the alarm, get on your knees, say a prayer, and then jump in the shower. What you don't do is the alarm goes off, and you hit the snooze button. And then 5 minutes later, it goes off again, and then you turn the alarm off for good, and go back to sleep. And 15 minutes later, you wake up again, look at the clock, decide you can sleep in for another 5 minutes, and then go back to sleep. And then 20 minutes later, go to work. So the heroic minute is essentially saying, I'm going to start my day off right, and just offer that first minute, that first struggle to God, and just say, this is for you, this sucks right now, but I'm going to do it anyway, and start my day off right. Good question. Alright, let's move on to the second point, concrete starts. So another thing that I have noticed in my life is that I seem to do better in my resolutions if I have a concrete and somewhat unique starting point. So to take the example of getting up at a good hour, I always noticed that if I'm making a resolution to maybe get up and go to work a little earlier, I find it easier for me to do this on a Monday than on a Wednesday. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One, the idea of Monday is just there's a fresh start about the week. You've had the weekend to recuperate. Monday is when you get started and get it rolling. By Wednesday, perhaps you have not gotten up when you wanted to on Monday and Tuesday, and you already are in sort of a losing environment where you failed earlier in the week, and it's going to be harder for you to do it on Wednesday because you have in the back of your mind, I have failed twice before, and it's going to be hard for me to do it. Because what's changed between Tuesday and Wednesday? Apart from you making the resolution, maybe not much. And I think, God realizes this and gives you a lot of special graces in times like this. We can think about seasons of the church like Lent or Advent. Just by making a resolution and starting on Ash Wednesday, I find that it's much easier to do it then than on a random day of the year. I think part of it is sort of the unique starting point, but a lot of it is also God really blesses those moments when you sort of take the time and say, all right, in accordance with the church, I'm going to try this thing, and He is going to bless that. Okay, so again, a couple notes on this point. First, this idea can be hacked a bit if you think about the Hail Mary. So the Hail Mary talks about there are two moments that really matter in your life, and that is now and at the hour of our death. Amen. So if that's true, then the only times we need to worry about are now and at that hour. And so in that sense, every time we make a resolution, it's a new now. And we don't need to be plagued by the failures or problems in the past, even though the environment is very similar. Now, this can be a little difficult to realize and actually put into practice because it is so hard to cast off those problems. So sometimes picking an actual concrete date will help, but it's not necessary because every day is a great opportunity to turn your life around. And then secondly, if you do decide that you need to start with these resolutions on a specific date, you don't want to turn it into an exercise of procrastination. Right? If you say, okay, I don't want to start my resolution until the new year, and it's October, that's a problem. So don't use it as an excuse to put your resolutions farther and farther back, but perhaps do pick a specific date if you need to. All right, the third point, self as enemy. So when you're making resolutions, I have found that it is helpful to treat the future version of yourself as your sworn enemy. Because that guy is going to weasel his way out of anything that he can. And you want to plan your resolutions in such a way that it's very hard for him to do so. So for example, let's say you want to schedule in 20 minutes of mental prayer at night. You don't want to just schedule it in your head as sometime during the night. And I think it's appealing to try to do so, right? Because we have a lot of events that happen during the night. You don't want to say, all right, I'll do my mental prayer at 8 o'clock because maybe I have mustard seed at 8 o'clock. Maybe my friends are going to a movie at 8 o'clock. You want something a little more flexible. But the problem with that is that future you is really going to take advantage of having a non-specific time. So what's going to happen is you're going to get home from work, and you're going to say, all right, I could do my mental prayer, or I could go for a run. You know, the sun is still out. I should do that instead. So you get back for your run, you make dinner because you're hungry, and you think, all right, I'm done with dinner, I should say my mental prayer. Then again, Breaking Bad is on. I kind of really want to watch that. I don't want to fall behind on the show, because that would be tragic. I'll just do my mental prayer after Breaking Bad. And sooner or later, before you know it, it's going to be 11 o'clock. You still haven't done your mental prayer. And at this point, you're too tired to actually do it. And you think, well, I'll just do it tomorrow, sometime during the night. And that will fail probably just as bad as this current one. So you need to put down some concrete times or events that are hard for future you to weasel out of. So for me, sort of when I get done with work and I'm driving either home or to the next event, I try to make a good resolution to sort of take some time right there, either still at work or going for a walk or something, and get some prayer. And this can also work for occasions of sin. So those who know me know that I have a passionate hatred for technology, despite being a computer programmer. And part of the reason this is because I really struggle with frivolous use of the internet. I can spend hours on Reddit or watching board game reviews on YouTube if given the opportunity. And neither of which really make me happy in the end, and neither of which are really a good use of time. And there's probably really nothing worse for your spiritual life than just wasting your life away with these activities. It's sort of the whole lukewarmness deal. So I noticed that if I had my iPod with me, which can connect to YouTube, it was very easy for me, from just sitting on the couch doing nothing, to pull it out, pull up the latest board game review or the latest whatever, and watch that. And I noticed that in a certain way, if I got home and I had the iPod on me, the battle was already lost by that point. Because future me was not able to withstand these temptations when I was just sort of sitting around being idle. And in this case, it was helpful for me to think of my future self as an enemy. This loser is going to do everything he possibly can to waste my time. And I need to come up with some foolproof ways to not give him the chance to do that. So I sat down and I thought, all right, I listen to music on my work computer, so I don't need my iPod for that. I listen to music in the car, and I do need my iPod for that. I have it plugged into the system. So my resolution was just never unplug it from the car. And that's a much easier battle to win than to decide not to pull up YouTube when you're just sitting around on the couch. All right, so treating your future self as an enemy is occasionally useful. Okay, the fourth point, the Band-Aid view, or hyperbolic discounting. So hyperbolic discounting is an economic idea, and what it means is that humans tend to devalue things that happen in the future as compared to things that happen in the present. So people have done tests where they ask other people, would you either prefer getting $1 today or $3 tomorrow? And pretty much people will take the $1 today. And if you ask people whether you're going to take $1 in a year or $3 in a year and a day, people will take the $3, even though the day interval is the same. Because we tend to make decisions that are inconsistent on different time scales. So we make decisions now that, from the perspective of our future selves, are really, really dumb. And in that way, in the same way that future you is your enemy, past you is kind of also your enemy. Just beset on all sides. And this has a lot of problems with procrastination. I think most people, if they thought about it, would agree with the following statement, and that is this: working is less painful than procrastinating. If I'm thinking about doing the dishes, I'm actually happier doing the dishes than I am sitting around trying to not do the dishes. I'm not racked with guilt about everything that I should be doing. I'm not sort of trying to avert my eyes every time I go past the kitchen. So there's that. And I'm also much more happy afterwards, after I've done the dishes. I feel accomplished at the end. And Chesterton said that the Christian ideal has not been tried and found wanting. It has been found difficult and left untried. I think this is true for a lot of things, doing the dishes, homework, but especially in prayer life. I have found that in my life, it's not so much when I'm doing the rosary I feel like quitting. The problem is I never start the rosary in the first place. And that is a problem with procrastination. So after thinking about it for myself, what I realized is that initial decision to snap myself out of whatever activity I was doing, whether it's watching YouTube or reading a book or playing a game, and deciding to go pray, that decision is a painful one because you have to sort of realize, right, what I'm doing is not a good use of my time, and that can often be a painful realization to come to. But because we evaluate pain and pleasure inconsistently when we throw time into the equation, even though the joy and fulfillment we get after praying and during praying, even taking that into account, and even knowing that we will continue to feel bad if in an hour we haven't prayed because we feel guilty, even knowing that we're going to feel good if we do it and we won't feel bad if we do it, it's still hard to stop procrastinating because those two things are in the future and this initial decision to snap out of it is in the present. So I found there are a few things that could help with this. One, just noticing the problem was enough to sort of get me thinking about it. Because when you hear that little voice of confusion in your head that says, John, why are you watching, this review? You don't even like this YouTube channel very much. Why aren't you praying? It's harder to push that and ignore it to the back of your mind if you sort of understand why you are doing it. Second, it's good to know and to really understand that that kind of decision is like ripping off a Band-Aid or jumping in a cold swimming pool. It's going to be easier if you get it all over at once. If you just make the decision and decide, all right, I'm just going to stop what I'm doing and attend to my prayer. And then third, this is really something that can best be overcome by grace and by building up your willpower. You can get this in track and under control by the success spirals that we talked about earlier, but it's also something that you should just pray about. If you're getting up in the morning and you're making a plan for the rest of your day, just say to God, I have a lot of problems with procrastination. Please give me the grace when I'm feeling tempted to continue on. Please give me the grace to ignore that and actually get to my prayer as I want to and as you want me to. And He will give you the grace to overcome those small temptations. So those are my 4 points on general methodology. I think James is going to talk more about this, but I also just wanted to close it with the point that I think a couple of these have touched on, and that is the idea of failure. Because I think when we consider the spiritual life, it is very hard for us to get back up after a failure. And this is not necessarily, this is true of a lot of things, including the spiritual life. But from the greater perspective, failure is not that big of a deal. We have confession, and if we really believe in confession, if we do something wrong, we believe that God forgives us and that we can make a fresh start then and there, and we don't need to be troubled by the past things that we've done. If we really believe in the efficacy of confession, we're going to live that out. And then also, think about it, now in the hour of our death. That doesn't matter about anything in the past. You can have failed a billion times in the past. As long as you are doing what you should be doing now, that's awesome. Okay, so that's what I have for the basic struggles that I've gone through. These are some things that have helped me in the past. Now I'll hand it over to Jamie to give us more good news.
Okay, so my name is Jamie. I'm a graduate student in chemistry. I'm in my 4th year. And when Emily sent an email about giving this talk, she said, talk about challenges to keeping the faith in grad school. I just kind of laughed. Because, Rose is taking a picture of me. I just kind of laughed because that's what grad school is, right? It's a series of challenges that push you to the brink of despair, really. I don't know how far into grad school you are. You're going to get there. Maybe you won't by the grace of God. But anyway, but the funny thing is that those challenges have had a profound impact on my God just calling me to Him. Okay, so I'm going to take a step back to the first mustard seed I attended, which was the first mustard seed the first year I was here. So that was a little over 3 years ago. Megan was there too. And Father Eric Nielsen, of course, gave his like really standard talk about the plan of life. And I remember sitting right in front of him. You know, he says heroic minute, and then making sure you say your rosary, go to daily mass, have 30 minutes of mental prayer, and have an examen at the end of the night. He says the same thing every time. Sometimes he only like talks about a few of those, but you're going to get some combination of those 5. But I remember sitting and thinking, like, that's such a great idea. That sounds really hard. It's probably not going to happen. And, you know, why? So why not, essentially? So my kind of question for myself in this talk, and probably for you too, is that we hear from Father Eric all the time, and you probably know yourself what you would like to do in your prayer life, what you would like to do in your spiritual life to live the Christian life. And there's probably some component of it that you're not doing yet, maybe, if you're like me. And so I am asking the question, well, the question was like, what challenges do you have in your faith? And so to me, I was thinking like, that's a list of like reasons why not. Like, this is why I don't make it to morning prayer. This is why I don't make it to daily mass. This is why I don't have any quiet time in the whole course of my entire day to reflect on things and thank God for the gift of life, right? So, but instead of focusing on that list of why not, because we all know what is on our list, I'm sure, and if you don't, you should reflect on that. Instead, I would like to focus on why. Do it. Like, why have a faith life? Why have a plan of life? Why make having a Christian life, living the Christian life, like number 1 on your to-do list? And there is really only one reason, and the reason is actually, of course, a person, Jesus Christ, and his love for us. And the way that we respond to his love is to love him in return, right? But you can't love someone that you don't know, which we all know from our own life experiences, right? So in order to love God, we have to come to know God. And so really, I think that that's like the biggest reason or argument for why to have a plan of life, because if you break it down, the point of all of those things that Father Eric always tells us to do is to come to know Christ and to know ourselves and to learn how to love God and to love our neighbor. And just kind of related to that, one of my college roommates, God bless her, put a nice Pope Benny quote on Facebook today, and it said something that supports this. Being Christian is not the result of an ethical choice or a lofty idea, but the encounter with an event, a person, which gives life a new horizon and a decisive direction. So this encounter with a person, with Jesus Christ, gives life a new horizon and a decisive direction. And so I love that, because Christ is our motivation. This like insane love that we cannot even fathom is like coming at us. And think about in your own life when you get human love, what do you want to do? You want to like respond to it in love, right? And the human love that we experience is just like an image or a shadow or like a small taste of this enormous, all-encompassing love of God for us. And so, you know, I mean, I can run through the list of the 5 things Father Eric always talks about, but like, what are you doing when you go to Mass? You encounter Christ in the Eucharist. You hear Scripture, you learn about Christ's life. You're coming to know him, you go to meet him. We can understand that in a very human way for our friendships and our relationships and with our families, right? Like, we go and spend time with those that we love. We go and we ask them about their lives. We learn about their lives, hear where they're coming from. Like, that's what it's the same in a very human way. Christ was a human being. Well, he was a divine being, but also had a human nature, so that we can come to know him in the Mass. And the same way with prayer. You go and talk to God, right? Talk to Jesus. He knows you perfectly, right? But you don't know yourself fully, and you don't know him fully, so you have to have a conversation. The Rosary, of course, is a perfect way to get yourself through the entire Gospel. If you think about it, I don't know, maybe I don't do it right? So you're supposed to pray the Rosary on particular days, particular mysteries. I don't do it that way, because I prayed in order. Because you get to go through the entire Gospel, like, all together, because that's what the mysteries do, right? Is teach you the Gospel. That's how they taught the Gospel before people were literate, right? So you could learn the mysteries of the Rosary and pray the Rosary and be catechized. So you're encountering Christ, you're learning about Christ, you're growing your relationship with Christ, and that also manifests in your community. So a really great help, if you're trying to grow in relationship with God is to be around others who are also trying to grow in relationship with God. And maybe that's a truth that we all know, but it has been one that's been really profound in my own life, especially really great roommates, both in undergrad and in grad school. Shout out to my beautiful roommates, always inspiring me to be more prayerful and like ask interesting questions about life and about how to live the Christian life. I didn't even like actually define that. So here's what I'm thinking Christian life. To live the Christian life is to put Christ at the center of everything. Christ to inspire your whole lens through which you look at the world, right? So to grow in love of God and then have that bleed over into everything else that you're doing, so that when you encounter your colleagues at work, you also show them love through patience and kindness and not telling scandalous stories and not encouraging others to tell scandalous stories and doing your work well with honor and good effort that reflect on the dignity that you have as a human being made by God. So my awesome roommates, workplace, let Christ like integrate into everything. I mean, that's the whole point, right? We're supposed to be unified. The Holy Spirit shows the unity of God with the Trinity. The Trinity shows the unity of God, right? And then we are supposed to be unified. So if your faith life doesn't bleed into everything else, you might not be unified as a person. You should work on that, because like if it's so true to be, like Jesus is so true, and his message for us is so true, to be so much love and redemption and forgiveness for our sins, but that only impacts like one part of your life, doesn't that call it a lie because you like keep it out of everything else? Or even if you let it into a few places, you let Christ into a few places, but not into everything. So if you put Christ at the center of your life, then that relationship with Christ is going to inform your relationships with others, right? And help you to love others authentically, and also to uphold your own dignity and to have respect for yourself, knowing your self-worth in Christ, and not your self-worth coming from like how well you do at work, or how fast you run when you do your miles at the gym, or whatever, if you do miles at the gym. And so that kind of like feeds into the second thing, is that when you're developing virtue in the Christian life, that feeds very well into developing virtue in your like natural things that you have to do, like work and be a roommate and be a daughter or a son to your parents. Those kind of like natural relationships. And so John mentioned, he brought this up, the idea to talk about failure. And I was like, I can talk about that, I have lots of experience. So, you know, I'm a grad student, and grad school's hard. And in fact, it is really kind of like exercises in failure, really, is what it is. And not just failure, but also perseverance through the failure. And not dwelling in the things that went wrong, but learning from those things and like trying again. And John was talking about that with like success spirals. Grad school sometimes you have like this failure spiral. So I counsel you against that by saying that just like in this, so what is grad school about? So I'm trying to talk about like how faith and challenges in grad school, but this also applies to life outside of grad school, but primarily in graduate school, like what are you trying to do? You've got to graduate. It's like the thing is there, it's the big goal, right? You have to graduate. That's great hope. In the spiritual life, in the Christian life, you want to go to heaven. You want to be a saint. And the fact that both of these have this like huge, big goal, that everything else falls underneath it. And if you're not living your life as if the ultimate goal, the big goal, the only thing is to be a saint, then you should think about that. Because none of us really are. Otherwise, we would be holier than we are. But, so, when you're striving after the Christian life, it's going to help you do better in your work. Because you're developing the same virtues for both things. You have to develop a sense of discipline, right? So if you have to pray every day, that requires great discipline. Especially if you're trying to do it in the morning, which means you even have to go to bed on time. What grad student does that? I mean, when in your whole life have you like regularly had a bedtime except when you were a child, and then you were probably trying to sneak out of that bedtime, right? So, anyway, every discipline, you have to have discipline. You have to have a great commitment to the good, right? You have to have that higher good held up as something that you have to do. I have no idea how long I'm talking. So you want to be a saint, so that drives everything else, and you direct all your decisions toward that. And just like in graduate school, where you want to graduate, so you're not going to procrastinate, you're not going to get too frustrated by something that you don't know the answer to, you're going to look around and try and find the new way forward, right? Not let yourself be too distracted at work. All of those things, like, those are all the same virtues. But to get back to talking about failure, I was just like briefly thinking about this really, and failure is a grace. And here's why I think it's a grace. Because if you receive it as a grace, first of all, you can learn so much, right? Because if you don't stay in the failure, but you like take it and you look forward, then you are so much wiser going forward. So whether your failure was your failure to like accomplish your spiritual life goal, which was to get up at 7:30 so you could make it to the chapel by 8:30, or if your goal was to like accomplish a particular experiment by a particular time point and you failed to do that, or if you did the experiment but you didn't do it very well and you didn't get the results you wanted, you can learn from both of those situations and be sanctified through that failure. And why can you be sanctified through failure? Because when you fail, you probably have some suffering. Why do you have suffering? Because you have a desire for the good, right? So when you fail to achieve what you held up as a good, you experience that in a human suffering way. Where's the crucifix in this room? There it is. Jesus makes suffering redemptive. Why? Because he is on the cross, which was supposed to be the ultimate defeat, but instead it is our ultimate victory. Because he is our only hope for heaven. And through him comes all of our hope. And because of that, anytime that you fail or you are suffering, you can be sanctified by that and just keep thinking about desiring to be a saint. So, in graduate school, just like your joys, because you'll have joys too, but there are plenty of struggles and sorrows and disappointments and failures, and if you offer them all to Christ, who is just an infinite mercy in his love for us, right? Like, all of those things can be for your good. But if you don't give them to Christ, if you just like hold onto them, then you're never going to move forward toward either one of your ultimate goals, which is to graduate or to be a saint, because you can just sit in your failures, and I do not encourage or support that life choice. But it happens. So that's why you have to have a regular plan of life, so that you have those moments in prayer to reflect on what's going on and what you should be doing and what you can do, and to find your hope in Christ. Because if you have some time to think through it, asking God for the grace, then you will be able to see beyond the failure. Trust in God for that. So, what else do I want to say? So, just like one, I don't know, failure, we'd like to talk about that for a long time probably. And we don't like to talk about failure because failure in our culture is like on you. It's like you have a deficiency in you. And because you have a deficiency in you, it's like you have less self-worth or self-value or whatever. It's just a lie. Because all of your dignity comes from God. And you can be a great saint, even with a life of total failure by the world's standards. So which do you prefer? Which do you desire? Because if we don't have a hope in God, we hardly live at all, right? We're certainly not going to have eternal life. But in God, maybe you suffer in this world, but we have great hope because Christ redeems all things. He makes all things new, whether the world says that it is worthwhile or not. So if you offer everything to God, he will turn it around and multiply all of that good for you. Maybe not in a worldly way, according to a worldly standard, but for your soul. And that's what we want. We want to be saints. So, and if there are things that are what are like the challenges in your life that are keeping you from having a life of prayer, that are keeping you from coming to God, whatever those things are, and we all know what they are, and maybe in your small group discussions you can like have some time to think about that, and if you're bold enough you can share. Maybe it'll help others. But you know, even if there are really, really big things that are keeping you, you think that are keeping you from coming to God or from trusting in him, or asking for forgiveness by going to confession for the first time in a really long time. Just in the gospel today, I don't know if you're able to go to Mass or to read the readings, but in the gospel today, Jesus is eating dinner at the house of a Pharisee, and a woman hears that he's there and goes to him there. And she is well known to be some huge, enormous sinner. But from the moment she arrives, she doesn't stop kissing his feet, and her tears wash his feet, and she dries them with her hair and anoints his feet with oil. And Jesus explains to the Pharisee that her sin is so great that the impact of Christ's forgiveness to her is just so much more felt than for the Pharisees, who consider themselves to be so righteous and really don't feel the effect or know the effect of forgiveness because they don't think they have as much to be forgiven for. So if you have something huge that's holding you back, like, don't let it. Don't be enslaved to it. Turn to God and trust in his infinite hope and love and mercy, because he says he makes all things new, not just minor things, all things. So no matter what might be challenging you or keeping you from God, maybe it's not anything big, maybe it's just you're a little lazy, or maybe it's that you kind of want to do those things that Father Eric's always telling us about, but you don't really want to do them enough to suffer a little bit, or to remove yourself from an attachment to hanging out with your friends, because in order to get up on time, you have to go to bed on time. To go to bed on time, you have to stop hanging out before midnight, probably, unless you don't need any sleep. More power to you. So, even those little things, like, oh, do you want the little thing more than you want heaven? John was talking about that, like delayed gratification, essentially. We gotta want heaven, but we can't be discouraged when we're striving toward heaven. Because in St. Francis de Sales, I was like trying to prepare for this talk on Sunday. I had been thinking about it. And I just cracked this open. I probably started reading this at Christmas because I gave it to my dad for Christmas, and then he like clearly didn't start reading it. I was like, oh, I'm going to take that book actually. So I took it back here. And I was reading it, and then I got to page probably 8 in January, and then I hadn't picked it up since. And then the talk was going to happen. I was like, you know what? I'm going to look at St. Francis de Sales' book. And St. Francis de Sales lived in the second half of the 16th century and the start of the 17th century. He was a priest and a bishop and advisor to popes, but really what he did that, God, thank you for this, he was a great spiritual director, and especially a spiritual director to the laity and to all kinds of people, from like poor, impoverished people to noble people. And he wrote a lot of letters and advice to some of those that he was advising, and at some point he was like, oh, I should put it in a book. That's what we have. And he's writing to one of his spiritual directees, and you have the quote on the blue paper, and I'm just going to read this to you so that you can see with great hope, this hope that we have to not be discouraged even when things like don't go right on the first try, because in the spiritual life they don't right. I told you that I heard from Father Eric more than 3 years ago to show up to morning prayer, and when did I start showing up to morning prayer consistently? This summer. Why? Because life sucked, and that brought me to God. Even though I was already coming to daily Mass, like, pretty regularly, I just, like, wasn't spending that time in prayer quietly. My life is really loud, and always is still loud. But anyway, this is about fighting the fight and not being discouraged and trusting in God, and also just, like, reflects the natural reality of how things affect us. So you will see as I read, like, I hope that this reverberates with you, because I was just reading it and I was just like, oh my gosh, this is what my talk is going to be. But instead it's kind of like the final note, but this is the best thing. So, then I'm going to have to say, not even my words, but here you go. The soul which rises from out of sin to a devout life has been compared to the dawn, which does not banish darkness suddenly, but by degrees. That cure which is gradually effected is always the surest. And spiritual maladies, like those of the body, are wont to come on horseback and express, while they depart slowly and on foot. So that we must needs be brave and patient, my daughter, in this undertaking. It is a woeful thing to see souls beginning to chafe and grow disheartened, because they find themselves still subject to imperfection after having made some attempt at leading a devout life, and well nigh yielding to the temptation to give up in despair and fall back. But, on the other hand, there is an extreme danger surrounding those souls who, through the opposite temptation, are disposed to imagine themselves purified from all imperfection at the very outset of their purgation, who count themselves as full-grown, almost before they are born, and seek to fly before they have wings. Be sure, daughter, that these are in great danger of a relapse through having left their physician too soon. It is but lost labor to rise up early and late take rest, unless the Lord prosper all we do. The work of the Lord's purification neither may nor can end save with life itself. Do not then let us be disheartened by our imperfections. Our very perfection lies in diligently contending against them, and it is impossible so to contend without seeing them, or to overcome them without meeting them face to face. Our victory does not consist in being insensible to them, but in not consenting to them. Now to be afflicted by our imperfections is certainly not to consent thereto, and for the furtherance of humility it is needful that we sometimes find ourselves worsted in the spiritual battle, wherein, however, we shall never be conquered unless we either lose life or courage. Moreover, imperfections and venial sins cannot destroy our spiritual life, which is only to be lost through mortal sin. Consequently, we only have need to watch well that they do not imperil our courage. David continually asks the Lord to strengthen his heart against cowardice and discouragement, and it is our privilege in this war that we are certain to vanquish so long as we are willing to fight. So I encourage you to not lose hope or courage, and to fight the fight every day to come closer to Christ, to center your life on Christ, to live the Christian life, whether you're at work or with your friends or with your family especially. And our hope is in the Lord, who made heaven and earth. So thanks for listening, and I think there are going to be questions that you can have in like a small group discussion with your table, and that's what I have.
Thank you so much, Jamie and John. I liked how both of you guys gave really concrete examples on how we can strive